senators, and President Trump standing alone, defending Saudi Arabia, even as a new UN report reveals shocking and deeply disturbing comments Saudi agents said on tape during the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, a huge stone wall. The White House blocking a key member of President Trump's inner circle from answering questions under oath. The president's former communications director, Hope Hicks, behind closed doors in front of the House Judiciary Committee today. But Trump's lawyers made sure she said nothing about her time in the White House.
Were there any questions about her time in the White House that she did answer?
Nope.
Not a single one.
Not a single one.
Not a single one. White House attorneys objecting to every question about Hicks' time in the White House. She wouldn't even answer where her desk was in the West Wing. Now, Hope Hicks knows a lot about Trump. She was one of his closest confidants during the campaign and in the White House. She was at his side constantly. A close ally to the president, telling me she was his emotional crutch. Just listen to how the president talked about her.
Look at Hope. Hope Hicks is doing a fantastic job. She's a fantastic young woman, and I'm very proud of her.
Now, Hope Hicks is a tremendously talented person.
I love Hope. She's great.
And today, the president made sure Hicks knew he was still supporting her, tweeting in part, quote, "So sad that the Democrats are putting wonderful Hope Hicks through hell." Democrats say Hicks was called to testify under oath because she was a key witness in Mueller's investigation. Her name is one of the most frequently mentioned, appearing nearly 200 times in the Mueller report. She was a key presence at major moments, including the firing of then FBI Director James Comey, Trump's role in crafting a false statement about the Trump Tower meeting, and Trump's hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Hicks today only allowed by White House lawyers to talk about one of those three topics under oath, the hush money payments, because part of that story happened before Trump won the election. The committee chairman, Jerry Nadler, saying Hicks, quote, "gave us a lot of good information" when she was allowed to talk. But the White House wouldn't let her talk about anything while the president was in office. And Chairman Nadler tonight says he will destroy White House claims of immunity on those other crucial topics in court. Pamela Brown is out front live outside the White House. And Pamela, the president obviously protective of Hope Hicks, and tonight trying to send a very clear message. You're wonderful. You're wonderful. Stick to it. How is he reacting today?
Well, Erin, President Trump is clearly bothered by the fact that his once closest aide and confidant Hope Hicks was back on Capitol Hill today. One source I just spoke with says the president is sympathetic towards Hope and feels she is getting bad treatment. As you point out, he tweeted as well, calling it sad that Democrats are putting her, quote, wonderful Hope Hicks through hell. But sources tell CNN, Erin, that Hope has distanced herself from President Trump since she left the White House, not because of her feelings toward the president, but because she wanted to start fresh after being tied up in Trump's orbit for so long. In fact, she didn't return several of Trump's calls, according to the sources, which prompted the president to ask aides what happened to Hope. But today on Capitol Hill, Democrats peppered her with questions about her time in the White House, asking granular questions, asking her where her desk was, as you said, in the West Wing, whether war broke out in the Middle East during Trump's presidency. She didn't answer any of those questions, citing it relates to her time in the White House. Democrats, though, clearly wanted to make a point of how sweeping the immunity claim is. The lawyers have said that she does get immunity. Democrats are pushing back, saying it's ridiculous. They need her cooperation in the obstruction probe. She did, though, talk about her time in the campaign. She said she didn't know about the hush money payment scheme during that time, but she wouldn't talk about whether she learned about it during her time at the White House. I'll tell you, though, Erin, it seems as though her talking today to Democrats on Capitol Hill is only increasing the tension between Democrats and the White House because of the immunity claim. Nadler, as you pointed out, he's not happy about it. He's saying it will not stand, and he's not afraid to take it to court. Erin?
All right, Pamela, thank you very much. And I want to go now to one of the congressmen who's on the committee that questioned Hope Hicks today, Democrat David Cicilline. Congressman, good to have you back. So we know that Hope Hicks did not answer questions about her time in the White House, down to the granularity of where her desk was. But she did answer questions about her time on the Trump campaign. So did she say anything significant in that portion?
Yes, the confidentiality agreement we have does not permit us to discuss what she said, but there will be a transcript released in the next 48 hours. And we certainly heard some very useful information, some important information about the campaign. But of course, what we were really interested in is to hear about what Ms. Hicks knows about the president's efforts to fire the special counsel and then to ask Dom again to lie about it and create a false document. We also wanted to know about the president's instructions to Corey Lewandowski to go speak to the Attorney General and direct him to tell the special counsel to curtail his investigation and only look at future presidential elections, not the current one, and the firing of Director Comey. She was in the White House in the midst of all this, part of the president's inner circle. The White House lawyers, on behalf of the president, prevented her from answering any questions that related to her service in the White House, making this very bogus claim about something called absolute immunity, which doesn't exist. The courts have rejected that. We don't have a king. There's no such thing as absolute immunity. She didn't invoke any privilege. They just used this made-up claim that they don't have to answer any questions, which will be rejected again by a court.
So I want to ask you more about what she said, but to that point first, obviously Chairman Nadler says he's going to destroy the White House claims, destroy his word, for absolute immunity for Hicks and the White House counsel Don McGahn, who's also crucial, and the White House is also preventing from testifying under oath. But, you say this is going to be easy. Look, I know it hasn't gone decided by the Supreme Court. The Obama White House even argued that a senior administration official in their case shouldn't have to testify. Are you really confident that you're going to be able to win this so easily?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Look, there's certainly a claim of executive privilege for some limited discussions between executives in the administration in conversations with the president. The witness did not invoke executive privilege. The president has waived executive privilege. So that's what is typically relied upon to try to keep the conversations confidential. This is a new claim. This is a claim that you can't ask us any questions about any activities in the White House because we have absolute immunity. There is no such thing in the law. It doesn't exist. The time it was raised previously, it was rejected by the courts. We don't have a king. We have a president who is subjected to the laws of this country, and absolute immunity doesn't exist. So I am confident that when this is litigated, the witnesses will be compelled to comply and answer questions. And this is part of the president's ongoing effort to cover up, to conceal, to keep from the American people the full truth and act as if he's somehow above the law. We cannot allow that to happen. He needs to be held accountable.
All right. So, obviously, it's the White House lawyers that stopped her from answering questions. And as you say, she did give very useful information about the time in the campaign. She testified in 2018, we know, before the Intelligence Committee, that she sometimes told white lies on behalf of the president. We understand that today she was asked about that. Sources tell us that, and that she said she never lied about anything, quote, substantial. Do you take her at her word and her evaluation of what substantial means?
Well, I think that's a very important question. There's public testimony from this witness that she told what she described as white lies. I'm not sure what those are, but certainly a person who's a part of the president's inner circle and an administration that has shown repeatedly its willingness to lie and to cover up. The admission of a witness that she has not been truthful even on insignificant things is important, and I think you will see when the transcript is released that there was a significant inquiry into that question.
Were you satisfied as to her answer?
No, I wasn't satisfied with a number of answers because I think the witness was prevented principally from answering the important questions by the committee at the direction of the White House, and that will not stand. A court is going to compel this witness to answer. If, in fact, there was ever a thing called absolute immunity, Congress would essentially have no ability to conduct oversight because witnesses would be free from testifying, and certainly that's not the law.
All right, so one thing that we know in terms of some crucial topics she was involved with, which I laid out, one of the ones she was able to answer some questions about, at least, was the hush money payments, because a lot of that happened before. Obviously, some of what the president said about it and said that was untrue was after, but a lot of the payments themselves obviously happened before he was in the actual White House. She has told the Wall Street Journal during the campaign that a story about payments to Playboy playmate Karen McDougal was totally untrue, right? So she denied it. Obviously, we now know those payments did happen. So that was not true. Michael Cohen's admitted it. Trump, as we now know, knew about it as well. Now, just because she issued a denial doesn't mean that she knew that it was untrue at all, right? The question is obviously who told her to issue that denial. Did you get an answer to that today?
I think you will see when the transcript is released that there was some inquiry with respect to those payments. And again, we're not permitted to discuss her actual testimony, but that subject matter was covered in part during the examination today.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Congressman Cicilline. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And next, breaking news, Joe Biden facing new attacks tonight for comments he made about working with segregationist senators.
I'm not here to criticize other Democrats, but it's never okay to celebrate segregationists. Never.
Plus, the only black Republican senator coming to Mitch McConnell's defense after the majority leader claimed the United States in part paid for the sin of slavery by electing President Obama. Why? And President Trump officially launching his 2020 campaign, but sounding a lot like he did last time.
33,000 emails deleted. They acid wash those emails. 33,000 emails deleted.
New tonight, former Vice President Joe Biden under fire for citing two segregationist senators that he served with as examples of colleagues he could work with during an era where, quote, at least there was some civility in the Senate. The comments last night during a Democratic fundraiser here in New York, and his Democratic rivals have been quick to respond.
Let's be very clear that the senators that he is speaking of with such adoration are individuals who made and built their reputation on segregation. The Ku Klux Klan celebrated the election of one of them. So this is a very serious matter.
I'm not here to criticize other Democrats, but it's never okay to celebrate segregationists. Never.
And Democratic Senator Cory Booker saying, quote, I'm disappointed that he hasn't issued an immediate apology for the pain his words are dredging up for many Americans. Out front now, White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Network's April Ryan, political editor for the New York Times, Patrick Healy, and national affairs correspondent for The Nation, Joan Walsh. Patrick, you're here with me, so let me start with you. The senators that Biden was talking about were James Eastland of Mississippi and Herman Talmadge of Georgia. Okay, these were segregationists, and sources tell CNN that advisors had warned Biden, don't ever talk about these guys. These two guys, you don't reference people like this. But he did it anyway. Can you think of a reason why he would ignore that advice?
These are the reference points, the political reference points that Joe Biden still has. Through a 50-year career, he still remembers the 1970s when he came into the Senate and you had all of these white men of privilege and power, different ideologies, but all working together as somehow, a more productive, more bills were passed.
Well, it's like halcyon days.
Yes, it's sort of like a version, unfortunately, of President Trump's kind of good old days. I mean, this is when things were done. This is when people of different ideologies got along together. And I think, for Joe Biden, I think he assumes that people know where his heart is, where his head is, and that people understand what he's talking about. But the problem is that these are reference points that are so far away from where today's Democratic Party is, and where particularly, liberal voters, activists, what they want to hear from a Democratic nominee. And these kind of remarks are sort of genuinely shocking to
Well, they
people.
are. I mean, they are. There could have been other examples, April, than to say, oh, when segregation was, the policy of these guys, I could still work with them.
Yeah. Well, I get what Cory Booker and many of the other Democratic presidential candidates are saying, but I also hear what Joe Biden is saying. What Joe Biden is trying to say is he had to work with these people to get things through. But, at that time, I remember people screaming about David Duke being on the Hill. I remember hearing names, Jesse Helms. I remember Strom Thurmond, and Robert Byrd. We heard a lot of names that a lot of these Democrats had to work with, and some of them were Democrats. And they had to work with them to get things passed. But for today, we are a very divided nation, and it's one side or the other. And he was talking about a time when he had to work with these people. But the problem for Joe Biden is right now is that these young people, these young people who were Obama young people, who helped Obama become president of the United States, they look at this as Joe Biden basically giving adoration to these people when he's not. But we're in a different era, and for him, the question is, how do you bridge this gap, or do you apologize, because this is a big chasm right now that he's created?
So, Joan, let me ask you to this point, though. A senior advisor to Biden's campaign, Simone Sanders, today tweeted, trying to explain this. Joe Biden did not praise a segregationist. That is a disingenuous take. He basically said sometimes in Congress one has to work with terrible or downright racist folks to get things done. Does that argument hold water? Does that add up to you?
No. I'm sorry, I love Simone, but it doesn't. I think the other thing that really hurt a lot of people is that he made, I guess it was a joke. I mean, we don't have tape, so we don't exactly know how it was said, but we trust the New York Times reporting, and he made a joke that, well, Eastland never called me boy, he only called me son. That's unacceptable. It's not funny. We know why he didn't call him boy. It was a word that he used for black people. And I almost feel like segregationist is a euphemism. These men were racist. They were deeply racist. And I really appreciate that April is being so kind and so big-hearted and open-minded about this. And I will try to follow her on this. But I also have to say, a lot of people are hearing this more and more as undermining Barack Obama. That Joe Biden's, the most important thing about Joe Biden right now is that his standing with black voters. And when he talks again and again as though he could work with segregationists and he can work with Mitch McConnell and he can work with, you know, even the modern Republican Party, what he's saying is, or he's raising a question about why Barack Obama couldn't. And I don't think he wants to be going there.
I mean, April, here's my question about, you know, some of this, right? I mean, it doesn't come in a vacuum, right? I mean, there are, by the way, members of the Congressional Black Caucus who are defending Biden's record on race relations, Congressman Val Demings, Sheila Jackson Lee among them. But there are many voters of different color who have concerns about Biden because of his 1994 crime bill stance, but also because of comments he has made, which is why it's hard to put this in a vacuum, comments like these.
You know,
in Delaware, the largest growth in population is Indian Americans moving from India. You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. So I'm not joking. I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man. Yeah.
He's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
April, does that contextualize what he is saying now in a more disturbing light or not?
Well, you know, I remember when he made those comments about Barack Obama, talking about how clean he was. Yeah. But you know, at that time, Barack Obama had to come out and save Joe Biden, you know, with those comments. Remember that? They're inartful, they're insensitive. He is from another time. You know, for some, those could be Archie Bunker words, but he is from another time. But at the same time, he's trying to say, look at his heart and look at who he is. But this is the problem that he has. You know, he is from an era, a bygone era, a time we want to forget. And he's saying those things with this, saying that he's got this heart. You got to stop it. You got to stop it, because we are now in the midst of a great divide. A great divide, as America is going to be great again. So he's got to fix his speak. And that's one of the reasons why he didn't do a lot of interviews when he was in the White House, because they were afraid of his openness, his candor. Joe Biden is very different. He has to work on this. He has to work on this.
So Patrick, here's the thing. All of this is happening, and, you know, we'll see over time, right? But, you know, you have this, you have the change on the abortion, the Hyde Amendment, right? I mean, there have been some issues that have...
He had trouble...
Right, sort of putting him back in the spotlight now in a way that he doesn't necessarily want to be, okay? All different types of reasons, but nonetheless, a spotlight he doesn't want to have on him. Poll after poll, though, still shows him leaning against Democrats and leaning against Trump, right? Monmouth today, the latest poll, commanding lead against Democrats. Latest Fox News poll shows him beating Trump nationally by 10 points. So Does all of this add up to anything, or is it much ado about nothing?
Yeah, it adds up to quite a bit with the base of the Democratic Party that right now knows Joe Biden, doesn't know a lot of these other people. Some part of that base is saying Joe Biden because of name ID when they answer
So
these
you think
polls.
things like this make them look around?
It makes them look around. It makes them go into the debates next week. It go into the summer. Seeing the positive news cycles that Elizabeth Warren or Pete Buttigieg get, it definitely opens minds, but it also raises questions about whether Joe Biden is what they want for the future of America, with someone who, again, has these reference points and makes comments like this. The thing the Biden camp tells itself, though, Aaron, is that they're probably going to raise far and away the most amount of money in this second quarter. They're going to be far ahead of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and they see this as a long ball. And the reality is, if a lot of us remember, in 2007, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, they were much weaker, rustier candidates early on. So the Biden camp at least tells itself this is a long ball.
And Joan, as Trump has shown, there is people have a tolerance for things that they did not have a tolerance for a few years ago.
Yeah, not the Democratic base. I think that I'm not saying that this is disqualifying or that he can't get past this, but we are not the Republican Party, and Donald Trump actually lost the popular vote. So Joe Biden needs to listen to his advisors. He needed to listen to them about the Hyde Amendment. He needed to listen to them about not talking about his work with segregationists. You can talk about other ways that you cross the aisle. Just don't go back there. It's just not going to end well for anybody.
All right, thank you all. And next, the debate raging over reparations for slavery.
The stain of slavery disadvantaged African Americans.
Republican in the Senate says about reparations for slavery tonight. Scott says, quote, "There is no question that slavery is a scourge on the history of America. The question is, are reparations a realistic path forward? The answer is no." And Scott just doubled down on this moments ago.
The subject of reparations is 100 years too old from my perspective. We should look for ways to grow our economy and give every single American a chance to compete.
This is in defense of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said this yesterday.
Yeah, I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've, tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president.
Today, Senator Cory Booker and others testified in support of a bill that would study reparations proposals. Out front now, Camille Foster hosts the Fifth Column podcast and partner at Freethink. And Wes Alsanat Desa. He's got a new last name. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Assistant Professor of American and Afro-Caribbean History at Fordham. Okay, thanks to both of you. So Wes, let me start with you. Senator Scott says reparations are not realistic, right? And he goes into detail too. He says, look, you can't figure out who we're compensating, who's paying for it, and this goes back to 1865. Why is he wrong?
Well, he's wrong because the history says something different. So first off, the first mistake is using slavery as an event. So it happened and then it stopped there. But slavery was inspired by an ideology, and that ideology is white supremacy, which we're still living with today. The other reason why he's wrong is, did you know that, for example, in 1862, the U.S. actually passed a bill that paid slaveholders in Washington, D.C. reparations for having freed their slaves. And each person was worth the value of $300, which today, when I looked it up, is about $7,000 per person, right? That money came from the federal government and paid out to each slaveholder. So we have seen moments where reparations were given, except it always goes in the other direction.
Camille.
Well, I think we're talking about a contemporary context, and that is the point that he was trying to make, that 100-odd years ago, 150-odd years ago, if we're going with Mitch McConnell, that there might have been a conversation to be had about reparations. But it is true that more than a century removed from that point, it's very, very hard for us to actually compensate people who were directly impacted by some of the things that transpired. One can certainly look at the last couple of decades and look at the 1970s and 1960s and various other epochs when bad things were happening to African Americans in this country.
Yes.
But the question becomes, what do we do about those bad things? And it isn't obvious that there is an easy, straightforward solution for parsing out some sort of compensation to people based on how much they've been injured on account of their blackness. What do Sasha and Malia, what are they entitled to, being the descendants of both slaveholders and slaves? What do they get? How do we actually figure this out? It is not straightforward. It is not easy. And I think that one of the folks who testified today, Coleman Hughes, actually underscored this in his comments, that we know for a fact that there are very serious problems that we could be addressing. We're not talking about how we address those problems because we're talking about reparations.
So Wes, what's your response to that? I mean, the Sasha and Malia, I know it seems academic, but it's not academic because you then get into this issue of, well, what do you do with people who are mixed race? What do you do with people who are black but not African American? What do you do about people who were abolitionists? I mean, what do you...
Well, the thing I find interesting about those responses is they're more about deflecting the actual conversation rather than actually answering.
But don't you have to address that to figure out
how much and to whom?
You
will eventually have to address the problem. Matter of fact, we were just talking about how I just got married and you had to say my new last name, also not Dasa. My wife is mixed race, is a mixed race black woman who is a descendant of slaves. Her grandmother actually had been the daughter of slaves. So what would we do about that? Well, we can go through her mother's line and consider how that affected her situation as a living citizen.
Is it deflection
but
to
also
point out
we
that
are
a
talking.
policy
We
is
are also talking
impractical
about
and crude and poorly thought out?
Okay, great. My friend here brought up the issue of being impractical.
And
there's nothing about this.
unconstitutional?
There's nothing about this that is impractical. I opened up with a specific example having to do with reparations. I will also give you other examples in the case of Haiti, for instance, where they paid reparations to France rather than France paying reparations to them. Matter of fact, in Great Britain,
all these things may be wrong, but again, it does come down to take your wife, take Sasha and Malia. Then what do? Do they receive or do they pay?
Great Britain.
Or do they get half?
Great Britain paid
these are real questions.
Great Britain paid its last payment of reparations to slaveholders in 2015. All right, so this issue of it's impractical, it's 100 years ago, and we have to deal with the present. That is precisely what this bill is trying to do. Bring us to the table to have a conversation about how do we move forward
I think the fact
to
that
get there. So if you want to talk about mixed race people, we can talk about their descendants. They have descendants who are people of African descent. So those people, most likely.
So you would have so anybody who's mixed race would be a recipient of money.
Are we talking about mixed race
African Americans? Right.
There are parties to this.
What I think we all know, especially
being mixed race did not exempt them from being enslaved.
Is that race is a social construct, and this notion of mixed raceness is similarly convoluted. It's not a thing that is straightforward. It's not something that we actually can parse out in any kind of concrete way.
So at this point, are we talking about reparations, or are we talking about the construction of race?
We're talking about
that's a whole entire conversation.
We're talking about both things because you just talked about mixed race people and it being a descendant of Africans. And here's the point that I think is perhaps underappreciated. It's the degree to which we're talking about a policy that requires people who were not a party to particular crimes, to particular harms, being responsible for paying for those crimes. I, for example, under some schemes, wouldn't be entitled to reparations. I would be responsible for paying them as a first-generation American whose family wasn't or ancestors were not enslaved here in the United States of America. Is that just?
Again,
is
Aaron,
it just to require people to pay for things that they were not
This is an example of deflecting the issue.
That's not deflection.
So what you do, you individualize it. You individualize it rather than talk about something that is collective.
I understand your point about collective. I get it, and I get it's important to have the conversation. But ultimately, if you can't individualize it, you can't pass a bill to pay people.
And if there are problems at the individual level,
here are we talking about? If you want to talk about paychecks to each individual, yes, you are going to have to decide who gets those paychecks.
And who pays.
And you know what? That is also very practical. And how do you do it? Well, there was a Freedmen's Bureau that find the families, right? Go through the DC papers in terms of this example I just told you about reparations. You will track the families. One thing that African-American families actually did after slavery was to travel around the country because for the first time they had mobility to seek out their families where they were, wherever they were. So you can track this. And well into the 20th century, under the administration of Roosevelt, you had reporters and you had academics who went out on the field and interviewed descendants of enslaved people. And many of those people were the last living enslaved Americans. So this idea that somehow you can't find the perpetrators or the people who had been affected is simply not true.
Well, you can find descendants of the perpetrators, which I think is the crucial adjective that you.
Also, if you want to talk about
find people who are the descendants.
if you want to
of
talk about perpetrators, did you know that Citibank is well involved, has roots in the slave trade?
And the current shareholders should be punished.
Ben Kaiser still has roots in the Holocaust. I mean,
the Lehman Brothers found some of their capital.
And their current shareholders should be punished for that.
All right.
The capital that
we hit
funded
pause.
that
As I say, I
firm
love
also
having you
went
guys
there.
on, and this is a conversation to be continued with you both. Thank you. And next, President Trump's message in 2020 sounds a lot like his message in 2016.
We are building the wall. Folks, we are building the wall, okay?
Eventually. Maybe, maybe not. How do Democrats run against, though, what was obviously a winning message? Plus, a new report reveals the truly disturbing things that Saudi agents said